Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint up an Ent for your games of Middle-earth strategy battle game, but these techniques can also be used to paint Treemen for the Old World or Blood Bowl.
The Ents are going to war.
So as you can see, I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even, dark base colour for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with some Dryad bark, and I'm going to paint this all over the model. As most of this model is wood, just cover this all over the entire model with a couple of layers of Dryad bark. And with this you want to build up to a nice smooth, even, solid colour of Dryad bark all over the Ent. But just take your time, work your way around the model, and in a couple of layers build up to a solid colour of Dryad bark all over the Ent. I'm also going to get this over any of the leaves and details like that, because we'll be painting these later on with a different colour, so it doesn't matter if we cover these with Dryad bark. So just make sure you paint the entire model with a layer of Dryad bark. So I'm also making sure I work it into all of the recesses and all of the details to get that solid cover of Dryad bark all over the Ent. And after a couple of layers of Dryad bark, you can see I've built up to a nice solid colour all over the Ent. So now the next step is going to be to shade the model. So for this I'm using Known Oil. I'm just going to apply Known Oil all over the model. Make sure you work this into all of the recesses. This is going to darken down that wood, add contrast into all of the details, make our next steps a lot easier. So just apply a shade of Known Oil all over the model. Make sure you give this a good long while to dry, maybe about an hour or so. Just go have a cup of tea while it's drying, and then we can come back and finish painting the rest of the wood. And after that Known Oil has dried, you can see it's brought out all of the details sculpted into the Ent, added definition into all of the recesses. So now it's time to start highlighting the wood. So to start off with this, I'm coming with some Baneblade Brown. I'm going to dry brush this all over the model. This can be quite a heavy dry brush. Just want to make sure you pick out all of the raised details with a dry brush of Baneblade Brown. Really focus this onto areas that catch the light the most, but make sure you cover all of the model with a dry brush of Baneblade Brown. Don't worry about going too heavy with this dry brush. We really want to brighten that wood back up, but leave that Known Oil in all the recesses. Our Dryad bark will act like a nice mid-tone on the model. So really focus on areas here like the Ent's face, because this will be a focal point of the model. Also make sure you catch all of these branches and all of the detail with the heavy dry brush of Baneblade Brown. With a heavy dry brush applied, you can see it's brightened up the wood, highlighted all of the details, but left those darker colours showing in all of the recesses. So now with some Rawk flesh, I'm going to come in and do a much lighter dry brush now. So you don't want to be too heavy with this, and I'm doing this in a downwards motion, so it will just catch the most raised details and points that the light would catch the most. Just come back through and with some Rakarth flesh do a light dry brush all over the model again. Always try and keep this in this sort of downwards motion so it just highlights the top areas of the Ent, will bring definition to all the raised details and highest points, and give the impression of light catching the top parts of the wood. So you don't want to come too heavy with this, you don't want to overbrush it with Rakarth flesh, but just make sure you catch those raised details with a light dry brush of Rakarth flesh. And after that dry brush has been applied, you can see it's brightened up the top facing surfaces of the Ent. And that is all of the wood quickly painted on the Ent. So this is a fantastic way to quickly paint a lot of tree models very easily. Now with some Castilian green, I'm going to come in and paint all of the leaves on the model. So make sure you catch all of the leaves coming out these branches here, on his back and his head. Catch all of these with a couple of layers of Castilian green. There are quite a few leaves, but this step still won't take very long, as you just have to pick them out with a quick layer of Castilian green. There are some leaves here tucked in at the back of his neck. I'm making sure I pick these out with a layer of Castilian green as well. And there's a little bit of ivy coming up his leg. So I'm going to make sure I pick out all of these leaves with Castilian green as well. And with that Castilian green applied, it's picked out all of the leaves on the model. So the next step, I'm going to pick out any of the moss that's growing on the Ent. For the moss, I'm going to be using some Death Guard green. And I'm just going to apply this over any of these bumpy areas of moss that are sculpted into the model. There's quite a few of these dotted around, so just look around the model and make sure you pick out any of these areas of moss with a layer of Death Guard green. This painting method is really good for painting up a whole army of Ents really quick. If you want an entire Fangorn army, this method really will allow you to get a lot of Ents on the table really quickly. Now with that moss picked out, the only last detail to base coat is going to be the little mushrooms growing on his legs. So for this I'm going to be using Rakarth flesh. I'm just going to pick out these mushrooms here on his leg. Try and be nice and careful around the rest of the wood details, but just pick out these mushrooms with a couple of layers of Rakarth flesh. With those mushrooms picked out, that's the last of the details on the Ent picked out. So now it's time to apply some shades to these areas. First shade I'm coming in with is some Biltan green. In this I'm going to shade all of the leaves and all of the moss. So just make sure you catch all the areas of Castilian green and Death Guard green with a shade of Biltan green. Being nice and careful, trying to not get this over any areas of the wood, although a little bit of overspill isn't a problem. It will just blend these areas into the wood. So just make sure you pick out all the areas we painted green with a shade of Biltan green. And now with some Agrax Earth shade, I'm going to shade the mushrooms on his legs. So I'm just catching these with a shade of Agrax Earth shade to darken them down and add a bit of natural coloration to the mushrooms.
Beach, oak, behold, many have come.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And once those shades have dried, we've added some definition to those leaves, moss and mushrooms on the Ent. So now it's just a few simple steps to highlight these areas. So with some Ogryn camo, I'm going to come in and do a very light dry brush over the areas of moss, just catching those most raised details on the moss areas with a light dry brush of Ogryn camo. Trying to be nice and careful around the wood. Once again, it doesn't matter if you slightly catch these areas, it will just blend these areas into the wood of the Ent a little bit more. And with all of the moss highlighted with that light dry brush, the next step is going to be to highlight the leaves. So for this, I'm using some Strachan green. I'm going to very lightly edge highlight the edge of all of the leaves. So you just want these to be fine lines, the edges of all of the leaves, just to pick them out and add some definition. If any of them have got these sharp lines here in the middle, just catching these as well with a thin edge highlight of Strachan green. Now you could dry brush this Strachan green all over the leaves because of how many there are and their positioning on the model, and they're very fragile. There's a risk that you'll catch too much green over the wood or you'll break off some of the leaves. So I find it's much easier to edge highlight them all with a little bit of Strachan green instead. Don't forget about these ones here on his legs as well. Make sure you highlight these with a thin edge highlight of Strachan green. And there's also the ones on the back of his neck as well. Make sure you catch those with some Strachan green as well. And with all of those leaves highlighted, it's really making the model pop and added interest all over the Ent. So now there's just a couple of details left to pick out on the model. So with some deepkin flesh, I'm going to come in and highlight the mushrooms. So for this, I'm just catching the very edge, the thin edge highlight of deepkin flesh. This will just make them stand out and look like the light is catching the very edge of the mushrooms. And with those mushrooms highlighted, there is just one last thing left to paint on the Ent, and that will be with some Avalan Sunset. I'm going to come in and paint the eyes. So for this, I'm very carefully just sinking some Avalan Sunset into the recesses of his eye sockets. So we'll give him nice bright eyes glowing out from the darker colours for the rest of the Ent. So just sink some Avalan Sunset into those eye sockets. And finally, with some Abaddon Black, I'm going to come in and paint a small vertical line in the middle of that yellow, which will act like a pupil. And with those eyes painted, that is how to quickly and easily paint an Ent model for your games of Middle-earth strategy battle game. So please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other monster models that you would like to see me paint? But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And happy painting!